Every day we hear about bias in the media, but never do we even hear about what that actually means. So I am here to do my best to explain the difference between perspective and bias, specifically regarding the media, as they are two related but vastly different concepts. And I guess I should mention that third concept.
My favorite.
Stupidity.
The glory of the masses.
Everyone has a perspective. Most, if not all, things we do or say is influenced by that perspective. In the media, perspective is even made apparent by the topics discussed and reported on.
Well, which ones would you? What examples? Like, I'm sure we can say that, but what like we're talking about, like religious, political, or all of them?
All of them, even sports teams and clothing brands.
Go Bears!
You're an awful person.
Yeah.
That is my perspective.
Your talented perspective.
What we find important is a function of our perspective. More importantly, how we interpret data and information is a function of our perspective. Now, truth be told, I am politically a liberal, and this absolutely affects how I interpret data and what I find likely to believe. Now, as you can see here, Cenk Uygur presents his data and cites his sources.
Atlantic Wire did this terrific graph of how much money we've spent on the drug wars and what our rate of return has been, because, and what I mean by that is, if we're winning the war on drugs, the drug addiction is going to go down, right? Okay, so there's addiction right there, 1970 to 2010, over 40 years. Wow, it looks like it hasn't changed much. And there's that line about U.S. drug control spending. Wow, siktirlan. $1.5 trillion. Does it look like it's helped? Addiction flatlines, spending goes way up. Somebody got that money though. And if I had $1 to bet, I might bet that those people who got the $1.5 trillion lobby the government. And then they might want this war on drugs to continue so they can get another $1.5 trillion.
But then he goes off and talks about where he thinks the money may have gone. At no point, however, did he present his opinion as fact. It was more of a side comment. This was his perspective. That would be that he would be inclined to believe that money corrupts in politics.
I think it corrupts everywhere.
I would tend to agree with that. This also affects the information that we would find reasonable and likely to be true. Accepting or looking at data that confronts a worldview is what sociologists and psychologists would call cognitive dissonance.
Bad stuff.
It is bad stuff, and but as a rational person and a person who cares about the truth value of what I believe, as I'm sure you are,
yeah,
we have to combat this phenomenon. And I think you should too.
Can you be more specific? I mean, me and you, we've talked about this before, but they might want to know a little bit more about what specifically cognitive dissonance is.
Cognitive dissonance is the phenomenon that prevents people from looking at the opposing side. What ends up happening is that when you're say I'm for gun control, but then I'm confronted with data that would be against what I believe, it would be more likely to for me to disregard this information as bias or incomplete than changing my paradigm or perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. I agree. All right, so now on to my little ditty here. I like to talk about bias just because I see it so often. People have perspective, people have bias, but bias is, I think, one of the more overused words in the English language when it comes to, well, everything.
I think it's highly misunderstood.
Yeah. All right, so bias is perspective when rationality and reason are lost. So you hear about zealots about whatever, just like they having that cognitive dissonance where it's like, you know what, I don't care what you say, I'm going to believe what I want, and you have to believe it too, or I'm not even going to be friends with you, or all this stuff. When someone loses the ability to look at the other side's perspective, when you lose that ability to say, I have my opinion, but I'm going to look at yours to see if it holds merit as well, then, really, that's bias. Okay, you're going to have your own opinion, you're not going to do anything else. All right, clarification. Being biased does not mean that you adopt that other perspective, because you don't necessarily. All right, it merely saying that you're...
Being unbiased, you mean, I think.
Yeah, but I misspoke. Being unbiased. Sorry. Being unbiased does not mean that you must adopt another perspective, meaning that you're subject to that perspective and that you're going to look at it, to consider it, all right? To be able to see the opposing perspective and apply rational thought to it. Now, a side effect of bias is a formation of a distorted and manipulation to support your perspective, the so-called fudging of the facts. Of a great example of this, which we're going to show you here in a second, is of probably one of the more hilarious people I've ever seen in my entire life, Mr. Glenn Beck.
But I'll stop. I'll just have the president say it.
And I really want to emphasize the word responsibility. I think that whether you are a white executive living out in the suburbs who doesn't want to pay taxes to inner city children, for them to go to school.
I know, man, all those white executives, what racist they are. They're all alike, Oh, they just hate those inner city kids. Wow. Inner city kids, that's not code language, is it? And gee, all those white executives that don't want to pay their taxes and have to go to, that sounds an awful lot like profiling. Bashing people without any of the facts. See, that's what we get in trouble for, we get accused of, but we have all the facts. I just use their words, that's what happens. But this seems to happen a lot, and nobody seems to point it out with the president.
So as you see in this clip, Glenn Beck cuts off Obama mid-sentence. And I mean, Beck only allowed a dependent clause in his statement. It's ridiculous, and I'm sorry, no matter what. Me and you have had many heated debates before, and never in those debates have we gone to just, rage quitting, cutting each other off. You present your argument, it may make me irritated, but then I present mine, and there's that mutual respect. Because if you don't have that in a debate, then there's no point in having the debate, because if you're not going to listen to the other side, then you can't really have a winner or a loser or any, exchange of information.
I mean, if you take things out of context, then it's actually what's called a straw man fallacy. And so it's presenting their argument in the way you want to present it to actually bolster your own. Another common thing that was taken out of context is in this past election in 2012, when Obama kept being quoted as saying, "You didn't build that." Well, that's one sentence in a 10-minute speech.
God,
well,
I hate sound bites.
Me too.
I hate sound bites so much.
All right, keep going. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, whatever. We're having discussions. So granted, you don't need facts to have a bias. You can have a bias just by being here. I can know absolutely nothing about grass. Okay, the grass around us you see is green. I could have a bias to say it's not green, it's blue. It's blue. Everybody knows it's blue. Now, granted, extreme, but it's an example of a just unmitigated bias. You can do it just by stating your opinion as a fact. No data to support it, nothing to back it up. It's just, here's my opinion, I don't care. But in the world in which you're trying to convince people of things of a different opinion, this is a last-ditch effort, and often done out of frustration and just an unwillingness to compromise. So, I think it's on to my favorite one.
Sometimes people are just plain stupid.
Oh, dear God.
And we go to one of my favorite and least favorite people in the world. How did Michele Bachmann get it into her head that the HPV vaccine caused mental retardation?
Well, I will tell you that I had a mother last night come up to me here in Tampa, Florida, after the debate. She told me that her little daughter took that vaccine, that injection, and she suffered from mental retardation thereafter. It can have very dangerous side effects.
I would love to see data to report that. I mean, that'd be a huge health concern, but me and you both looked. There's nothing. None.
No.
Anybody who's written a research paper ever, take point here. Have data. It's important.
And again, we go back to another
Glenn Beck!
Yes, Glenn Beck. This man has the most amazing ability.
It is. I'd have to go with ability on that one because I don't think it's quite a superpower.
To link everything to the Nazis or the KKK.
History, when properly taught, has already shown us where it leads. This is what Nazi Joseph Goebbels said about the Hitler Youth. This is what Hitler did with the SS. He had his own people. He had the brown shirts and then the SS. These are the brown shirts. Some may believe we're on the road to the Hitler Youth. You have to think like a German Jew, 1934.
If you guys haven't seen it, if you didn't watch the clips, take 5 minutes of your day and just bring some popcorn and go watch some of Glenn Beck's stuff, because I'm not saying that you're necessarily going to find, because I still have yet to really find a lot of factual data on there, but watching the man...
There isn't.
That's why I said, yeah, he might have a stroke and may be able to do it. So you never know. Honestly, I wish he'd diversify it up a little bit. I mean, I don't think he's hit Al-Qaeda yet. I don't think he's gone to China or anything else.
No, I think at one point, I don't remember this exactly, but I think he somehow linked Obama to Al-Qaeda. I'm sure he's done it.
Oh, okay, fair enough. But still, it's amusing, and it's one of the more amusing examples of stupid that I've seen in my day. Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll get to the meat of the whole thing. The media.
Media.
So the question is, that I'm sure you're wondering, which major networks are biased?
All of them.
All right, that's fair.
Yes.
But it's a tough question to answer because there are too many nuances to it. Sure, you can say all of them.
All the networks, yes.
Or you could just point out the two obvious ones, MSNBC and Fox. I need to clarify here that opinion is not necessarily bias. However, when you get over 80% opinion...
Pew found that MSNBC broadcasts opinion a whopping 85% of the time. But if you watch MSNBC, that should come as no surprise.
We've learned one thing from the last 4 years, and the Republicans will stand on your neck and then stab you in the eye.
But isn't being in favor of civil rights but against the Civil Rights Act a little like saying you're against high cholesterol but you're in favor of fried cheese?
By raising the specter of Americans sitting in cafes being struck down by U.S. drones, most people are not concerned about that. It seems crazy. It seems fringe.
I think that comes at the cost of impartial data.
Well, are we going from opinion from just, Jimbo Bob and, Susie Zoo, or are we talking about, experts and credible sources that could be...
You're talking about pundits, mostly. You're talking about Rachel Maddow, you're talking about the Reverend Al Sharpton, Ed Schultz.
Al Sharpton.
But I think when you get that much opinion, it comes at the cost of impartial data, which can be considered bias.
Yeah.
And do I really need to talk about Fox? Let me,
It's fun to make fun of Fox. Let's do this, yeah.
Well, let us look at somebody who's researched Fox a little more than us.
Fair enough.
An examination of his career reveals that Ailes has used Fox News to pioneer a new form of political campaign, one that enables the GOP to bypass skeptical reporters and wage an around-the-clock partisan assault on public opinion. The network, at its core, is a giant soundstage created to mimic the look and feel of a news operation, cleverly camouflaging political propaganda as independent journalism. Now, this is a pretty long article, but it's very interesting, and I highly suggest you read it.
Is it like Dickinson?
Yeah, it's Rolling Stone.
Oh. Alright, I think I remember that.
Yeah. Now, is media bias intentional? Yes and no. I'm of the opinion that all corporate news is intentionally biased, but not in the way that is commonly understood. It doesn't always have to be politically biased.
It can be any bias.
Any bias. MSNBC and Fox are easy because one parrots the GOP and the other parrots the Democratic talking points. But what about CNN?
They're supposed to be more, unbiased. They're supposed to be kind of like the median flow between more independent-ish.
But the thing is, when you look at, say, the debates of 2012 presidential election, what ends up happening is that when public opinion showed... Now, public opinion does not mean fact, it's just...
Public opinion. It's what people think.
Yep. Now, public opinion in when the Democrat, Obama, was ahead in the polls as who won the debate. And this was when, Obama had 59% of people saying he won the debate, stuff like that. Whereas, so what ended up happening is that CNN said, well, 59% of people think this, 41% thought Mitt Romney won. Well, it was a toss-up.
It's a debate. Unless one concedes, it's hard to have a true one.
No, but what they said is that it was a toss-up as to who won the debate.
Oh.
And so, I think they're biased to be unbiased, or to be the middle person.
To not have an opinion, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. That's not necessarily a bad thing, especially for a news service nowadays.
Except when when you have two extremes, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're both equally legitimate.
True.
As an example, say someone was, of the KKK, and the other person said, we should integrate the schools, back in the 1950s, CNN would be the one saying, well, they both have legitimate opinions.
Oh, so instead of having no opinion, so instead of, you have your extreme of Fox saying, you must believe this, we're having the I don't want to comment.
Exactly.
Okay, fair enough.
Now, that is my opinion, and if you think otherwise, please absolutely tell us in the comments.
Yay, there's still something that isn't telling me what to do here.
Alright. So, how can you tell if the media is pushing a perspective, Mike?
It's not easy. Sometimes, sometimes it is actually quite hard. Like you kind of said before about the whole Fox thing as it being, it's really a political center set up to try and feel like a news service. But there's a very clear-cut way, and then there's the way that most oftentimes you actually have to do it. So clear-cut is, you can say, here is my opinion, and it's the only fact you have to worry about. Just take my opinion as fact. You don't need anything else. If someone tells you that, that's pretty much just a guarantee that they're full of baloney. But some people they're a little more tricksy, or they're not realizing to do it. So you have to think about the following: is it taken the context? Is it something where it has no absolute sound bites? Perfect example there. Sound bites. The 47% thing. taken out of context 90% of the time. You know, sound bites on Obama, sound bites on like everybody oftentimes are twisted to mean things that they really weren't meant to say because they were taken out of context.
Yep.
Is it reputable? Does the source have, you know, documentation? Is it something that's backed up by data? So, you know, again, it's like saying the Earth is flat versus round. Well, you can say the Earth is flat, but if you say, okay, I have all these measurements, this scientific data, these pictures from outer space, all this stuff that proves logically, step by step, here's where it is, or at least sources cited that have that reputation, then, you know, it's going to be more legitimate than something that just says from, you know, Hicksville, you know, Humane Society says the Earth is flat.
Now, personally, I've always found university studies far more reputable than anything else, because their entire reputation is based on being reputable.
True. Very true. That and all those grad students don't have time for bias. They're just trying to, you know, get by.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, is it verifiable? Which kind of ties into the past one, but verification versus reputation is very different. So, again, it kind of goes to straight up data. Is this something that can be recreated? Is it something that you could say, okay, I'm going to make my own thing, I'm going to recreate these exact situations, and can I find the same thing happening? And then have other news outlets reported this particular story. I mean, it's one thing if, again, Hicksville local news says the Earth is flat, but a completely different thing if the, you know, like CNN or all the other news networks have kind of picked it up, or if it's something that, you know, like, let's say NASA decided to put out on their specific page, hey, according to our instruments, we've seen this, or the other thing. And then, is this an interpretation of data, or is it raw data? If you have interpretations are open to bias. Interpretations are open to stupidity and perspective, but you have to be able to say, is this just an interpretation of what the story is, or is this a, you know, just here's what it is?
Now, understand that interpretation of data is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not.
Because if there isn't interpretation, there isn't a story.
True.
So, like, you look at, and going back, you know, hundreds of years,
true.
When you're talking about why the sun, you know, seems to rise, well, the interpretation, there were two different interpretations, and they were both trying to figure out why it happened.
God will come.
That's the interpretation I buy.
So sometimes you'll find a piece of information that passes all these tests, that, you know, you kind of use that rare gift that, you know, humanity has but doesn't really use, you know, common sense. And you can see that the story, you know, is legit, but it's still going to have bias. Now, it's the best way for you to discover that bias. You have to see it and then be able to interpret it yourself.
Do your homework.
Absolutely.
Don't take us for granted. You know, we're just interpreting things too.
Yeah. So, I mean, being skeptical is a good thing. I mean, Reagan, had a great saying: trust but verify. You can take things at face value, and that's fine, but make sure you go and check it out first. I mean, look at all the resources we have at our disposal today. We got Google, we got all these other things that you can pull up legitimate raw data to back up pretty much any story you read anywhere.
You know, that piece of advice makes sense to me.
There you go. So, again, always be skeptical. We are all the time.
Be skeptical of us too.
Well,